Charles Denton had power, Margaret Bell had secrets, and Pastor Jonathan Reeves had control. But in the heart of Crestwood, only one of them was willing to kill to protect what mattered most. Crestwood looked like the kind of place where nothing bad ever happened. It was small, quiet, and the kind of town where everyone waved when they passed each other on the street. The houses were neatly lined up, the lawns trimmed, and the main street was filled with cozy cafes, family-run stores, and the ever-present St. Matthew's Church standing proudly at the center. For over 20 years, Pastor Jonathan Reeves was more than just a religious leader. He was the heart of Crestwood. People trusted him with their prayers, their worries, and their deepest secrets. He was the one who blessed newborns, married couples at the altar, and stood by gravesides during funerals. His presence was comfort itself, and nobody questioned it. That's why what happened on that cold October morning didn't make sense to anyone. It started like any other Sunday. The sky was gray, and rain had fallen throughout the night, making the streets slick and the air heavy. Just before sunrise, Mark Heller, the church's janitor, unlocked the back door like he always did to start cleaning before the service. He walked through the narrow hallway, noticing right away that something wasn't right. One of the stained glass windows at the side of the church had been shattered. The colorful glass pieces were scattered across the floor, mixed with rainwater dripping from the broken frame. At first, he thought it might have been a break-in, maybe kids playing a prank. But when he walked closer to the altar, his stomach turned. There, just a few feet from the steps, was Pastor Reeves. His arms were at strange angles, his face pale, his body completely still. There was no sign of blood, no obvious injury, but one thing was clear: he wasn't breathing. The church, usually filled with the sound of hymns and whispered prayers, was now filled only with the sound of distant rain and the occasional creak of old wood. Within minutes, the building was surrounded by flashing red and blue lights. Police tape went up, photographers snapped pictures, and curious onlookers gathered outside, whispering in disbelief. How could this happen in Crestwood, in the one place that symbolized peace and trust? The front doors were still locked, suggesting whoever had come in either knew how to get around the locks or had been inside the whole time. The absence of struggle confused everyone, even the officers who'd worked homicide cases in bigger cities. There were no defensive wounds, no broken furniture, nothing disturbed except that shattered window and the lifeless body on the floor. News traveled fast in small towns. By lunchtime, every cafe, grocery store, and gas station was buzzing with rumors. Some said it was an accident. Others whispered about enemies, secret grudges, or something darker hidden beneath the church's clean image. As the investigation began, one thing became painfully clear to everyone. Crestwood wasn't as perfect as it seemed, and what they were about to uncover would shake the town to its very foundation. At first, the town struggled to believe that anyone in Crestwood could be behind such a brutal act. The community was tightly knit, with families going back generations. People didn't just know each other's names, they knew each other's stories. But the calm surface of Crestwood hid cracks that no one had dared to notice until now. As detectives began questioning members of St. Matthew's congregation, the image of Pastor Reeves as a flawless, respected leader started to fall apart piece by piece. It began with small confessions, whispers of disagreements, arguments behind closed doors, financial disputes. But soon, deeper scandals began to surface. Reeves, it turned out, had a pattern of charm that extended far beyond his Sunday sermons. Multiple women came forward with private stories of being pulled into secret relationships with the pastor. These weren't just rumors. There were phone records, hidden letters, and even photographs locked away in dresser drawers, hidden from curious spouses. These relationships weren't born out of love. They were manipulations, carefully orchestrated behind the scenes, with the pastor's soft-spoken charm masking his control. The most damning discovery involved Olivia Denton, the wife of local businessman Charles Denton. Charles was one of the wealthiest men in Crestwood, owning half of the properties along Main Street. Behind closed doors, his marriage had been falling apart, and now the entire town understood why. Olivia's secret involvement with Pastor Reeves wasn't just a betrayal, it was a humiliation for a man like Charles. For weeks before the murder, Charles had been acting strangely withdrawn, barely speaking to anyone. It didn't take long for his name to rise to the top of the suspect list. But motives alone weren't enough for an arrest. The church's security system had been unreliable for years, the cameras positioned outside long broken. Local businesses checked their footage, but no suspicious activity was captured around the church that morning. Even more frustrating for the investigators, no fingerprints had been found on the broken window or the surrounding objects. Whoever did this either knew exactly what they were doing or was incredibly lucky. As the investigation deepened, it became clear that Pastor Reeves had built his entire reputation on careful lies. His sermons about forgiveness and family values were hollow, disguising years of manipulation. For some in the congregation, the grief of losing their pastor quickly transformed into something else: resentment. They weren't just angry at the killer, they were angry at Reeves himself for living a double life and dragging their community into scandal. Soon, people began to take sides. Some defended the pastor, believing that no one deserved to die that way, no matter their sins. Others were convinced that this was the inevitable end for someone who had deceived too many people for too long. In Crestwood, neighbors who once greeted each other with warm smiles now passed one another with suspicion in their eyes. And underneath all of it, one unsettling truth remained. Whoever killed Pastor Reeves was still out there, blending into the very fabric of the town, hiding in plain sight. Just when it seemed like the investigation was running out of leads, an anonymous letter arrived at the police station. The envelope was plain, the handwriting shaky, and there was no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with words that sent a chill through the room. The letter didn't just point fingers. It exposed a completely different side of the case that no one had seen coming. It claimed that Pastor Reeves had been blackmailing members of his own congregation, using their private confessions against them in exchange for money, favors, and influence. The details in the letter were specific, too specific to ignore. It named 3 families in town, all respected members of the church community, who had quietly paid Reeves over the past few years to keep their secrets hidden. Affairs, gambling debts, hidden addictions, all of it used as leverage. Suddenly, the motive for murder widened beyond just jealousy or betrayal. Now, the investigation had stepped into the dangerous territory of power, control, and quiet desperation. News of the letter didn't stay contained for long. In a town as small as Crestwood, secrets spread like wildfire. Overnight, the narrative of a beloved pastor's tragic death turned into something darker. The congregation wasn't mourning anymore. They were afraid. The idea that someone they trusted with their most personal confessions could use that information for personal gain was more than a betrayal. It was a violation of the very foundation the church was supposed to represent. The letter also hinted at something else, something that made the case even more unsettling. The killer might not be an outsider or a jealous husband. It suggested that the person responsible could be someone who sat in the church pews every Sunday, smiled during services, and shook hands with neighbors without ever revealing their true intentions. That idea tore at the community. Who could they trust now? People who had been friends for decades stopped speaking to one another. The church became a place of quiet suspicion, with every glance and greeting carrying a weight of uncertainty. Detectives followed up on the names mentioned in the letter, interviewing families, checking financial records, and digging through years of quiet transactions. What they uncovered confirmed the letter's claims. Payments had been made, often in cash, handed over in secret meetings under the pretense of church donations. Those families had motives, but like before, there was still no solid evidence connecting any of them directly to the murder. Even more frustrating, the source of the letter remained unknown. Was it written by someone with first-hand knowledge, or just a desperate attempt by another guilty party to shift suspicion elsewhere? The more they investigated, the more tangled the story became. Crestwood was no longer just a small, quiet town with a tragic death. It was now the center of a growing web of lies, betrayal, and fear, and the killer was still hiding somewhere within it. As the investigation continued, frustration grew. Leads were thin, and every new discovery seemed to raise more questions than it answered. That's when one of the detectives decided to take a different approach. Instead of focusing solely on the people, they turned their attention to the church building itself. St. Matthew's was old, built nearly a century ago, with renovations done piecemeal over the years. Hidden corners, sealed doors, and forgotten rooms were scattered throughout the property. If Pastor Reeves had been hiding secrets, maybe the building itself could provide answers. During a careful sweep of the church, something unusual caught the detective's eye near the pastor's office. There was a small section of wooden floorboards that felt loose underfoot. At first glance, it looked like a normal sign of an aging building, but closer inspection revealed something more deliberate. The boards had been lifted and replaced before, carefully fitted to avoid notice. With slow precision, the detective pried them open, revealing a hidden compartment beneath the floor. Inside were several old, weathered envelopes, each carefully labeled with names of people from the congregation. Alongside them were photographs, handwritten letters, bank receipts, and photocopies of legal documents. It was an entire archive of blackmail material, carefully stored and organized. The extent of Pastor Reeves' manipulation was worse than anyone imagined. These weren't just rumors anymore. This was hard proof of a long-running scheme to control people in the community through fear and shame. Among the materials was something that immediately stood out: a series of photographs showing Charles Denton involved in questionable dealings, far removed from just an affair. The photos revealed Charles meeting with men known for illegal gambling operations in nearby towns. There were also receipts of large cash withdrawals from Charles's accounts, suggesting he had been paying to keep this part of his life hidden. Pastor Reeves had not only betrayed Charles personally by involving himself with Olivia, but had also used these photos to extort him for thousands of dollars over the past 2 years. Now the investigators had a motive strong enough to make Charles Denton the prime suspect. The pieces were starting to fit together. A betrayed husband, humiliated in both his personal and financial life, cornered by a man who had used his position of trust to manipulate and destroy him. But even with the motive, the puzzle wasn't complete. There were still no fingerprints, no witnesses, and no clear evidence placing Charles at the scene of the crime. The discovery of the hidden compartment shifted the tone in Crestwood again. What was once quiet grief became outright anger, not just at the killer, but at the man they once trusted as a leader. Families that had admired Reeves now found themselves wondering how much of their private lives had been at risk. Yet the most disturbing question remained unanswered. If Charles didn't commit the murder, then who had taken it upon themselves to end Pastor Reeves's life? And why?